My name is Rabbi David, and for as long as I can remember, my life has been centered on faith. I have devoted my days, my energy, and my soul to serving God and guiding those who look to me for wisdom. As a spiritual leader, my purpose has always been clear: to uplift my community and remind them of the eternal truths found in the Torah. For decades, I believed my faith was unshakable, my understanding of God solid. But life has a way of testing even the strongest foundations. I was born into a devout family where God's presence was felt in every moment. My earliest memories are of my grandfather, a man of immense faith, telling me stories of the prophets, Moses parting the Red Sea, Elijah calling fire from heaven. I hung on to every word, feeling a deep connection to these stories of unwavering trust in God. By the time I was a young man, I knew that my path was set. I was going to dedicate my life to God, to study His Word, and to guide others in walking His path. Becoming a rabbi felt as natural as breathing. I immersed myself in the Torah, finding joy in uncovering its wisdom and sharing it with others. For decades, I led prayers, taught scripture, and delivered sermons to my congregation. I was there for them in their happiest moments and their darkest days, officiating weddings, naming newborns, sitting beside them in hospitals, and mourning with them at funerals. These were not just duties to me, they were sacred acts, opportunities to serve God by serving His people. Each day began the same way. Before the sun rose, I would wrap myself in my talit, recite the morning blessings, and feel the words connect me to generations of Jews before me. Leading services and teaching Torah were my greatest joys. When I saw the light of understanding in someone's eyes, or heard the heartfelt thanks of someone I had counseled, I felt a deep sense of purpose. My faith was not just something I practiced, it was who I was. But even the most steadfast faith is not immune to the tests of life. It started with a nagging fatigue, the kind you brush off as part of growing older or working too hard. I told myself it was nothing. After all, the work of a rabbi is never done, and I had learned to push through exhaustion. But then came the ache in my stomach, dull at first, then sharper, more persistent. I tried to ignore it, to pray through it, but it didn't go away. My wife Miriam noticed. She's always been my anchor, and when she insisted I see a doctor, I finally agreed, more to ease her worry than because I believed something was wrong. I remember the day of the diagnosis as if it were yesterday. Sitting in the doctor's office, I heard the words, but they didn't feel real. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The words echoed in my mind, heavy and unrelenting. For a moment, I felt as if the ground beneath me had given way. I thought of the families in my congregation who had faced similar news, how I had comforted them with words of faith. Now those words felt distant, as if they belonged to someone else. As Miriam and I left the doctor's office, I could see the worry etched into her face. She didn't say much, and neither did I. What was there to say? But as the reality of my situation sank in, I made a decision. I would face this trial the same way I had faced every other challenge in my life, with faith. I prayed for strength, for understanding, and for the courage to walk this path, no matter how difficult it might become. The treatments began soon after. Chemotherapy was grueling, far worse than I had imagined. The nausea, the weakness, it felt as if my body was betraying me. Yet I held on to my faith, turning to God in prayer, even in my weakest moments. When I couldn't sleep at night, I would recite verses from the Psalms, finding solace in words that reminded me of God's presence, even in the valley of the shadow of death. Still, there were moments of doubt. Lying awake in the quiet hours of the night, I would ask myself questions I never thought I would. Why was this happening to me? Had I failed in some way? But I always came back to the stories of the prophets, of Job, and his unwavering trust in God, even in the face of unimaginable suffering. I told myself that this was my test, my moment to prove the strength of my faith. Despite my resolve, the illness took its toll. My body grew weaker with each passing day. There were moments when I could barely stand, and even simple tasks felt insurmountable. My family, ever supportive, tried to lift my spirits, but I could see the fear in their eyes. Miriam, my rock, would sit by my side, holding my hand, her quiet strength reminding me that I was not alone. Then came the night everything changed. I had returned home after another exhausting treatment, barely able to make it to my chair. The ache in my stomach was unbearable, but something else was happening. A tightness in my chest, sharp and unrelenting, began to take hold. I tried to call out to Miriam, but the words wouldn't come. My vision blurred, and I felt myself slipping into darkness. And then it happened, a moment that would alter everything I thought I knew. But that is a story for another time. That night felt different, as though a storm was brewing inside me that I couldn't control. The pain in my stomach was sharper than ever before, and the tightness in my chest made it hard to breathe. I had grown used to the constant discomfort over the past months, but this was different, more intense, more final. Miriam sat close to me, her eyes filled with worry as she held my hand. "Let me call the doctor," she pleaded. I shook my head. I didn't want to spend another night in a hospital room. I just wanted to be home, surrounded by the things that reminded me of life, of purpose. My children were in the next room, whispering among themselves. I could hear the worry in their voices, though they tried to hide it. They had seen me grow weaker with each passing day, my once steady hands now trembling, my voice a shadow of its former strength. I hated seeing the fear in their eyes, the way they looked at me as if I was slipping away. But deep down, I knew they weren't wrong. As the hours ticked by, the pain became unbearable, and I tried to pray, to focus on the words that had always brought me comfort. But my mind was clouded by the agony coursing through my body. "God," I whispered, "if this is my time, give me the strength to face it." I clung to my faith, though it felt like holding onto a rope, fraying at the edges. The tightness in my chest intensified, and my breathing became shallow. Miriam's voice broke through the fog. "David, stay with me," she cried, panic rising in her tone. I wanted to reassure her, to tell her I was fine, but the words wouldn't come. My vision blurred, and the room around me began to fade. The last thing I saw was Miriam's face, her tears falling as she called my name. Then there was nothing, or so I thought. When I opened my eyes, or at least what I thought were my eyes, I wasn't in my body anymore. I was above it, looking down at the scene unfolding below. Miriam was on the floor beside me, shaking my shoulders, her cries filled with desperation. My children had rushed into the room, their faces pale as they frantically called for an ambulance. I saw myself lying there, motionless, my chest eerily still. It was a strange sight, seeing my own body as though it belonged to someone else. I should have felt fear or panic, but instead, I felt an odd calmness. There was no pain, no heaviness, just a lightness, as if I had been freed from the weight of the world. I tried to speak, to tell them I was still here, but no sound came out. I reached out toward Miriam, but my hand passed through her as if I were made of air. It was then that I realized I was no longer tethered to the life I had known. The paramedics arrived, their voices urgent as they worked to revive me. The scene below was chaotic. Miriam sobbing, my children huddled together, the medics shouting commands. But it all felt distant, as though I were watching it through a pane of glass. I wanted to comfort them, to tell them I wasn't gone, but I was powerless to do so. I was a silent observer, caught between two worlds. Then something shifted. The room grew brighter, not from the overhead lights, but from a faint glow in the distance. At first, it was barely noticeable, like the flicker of a candle, but it grew steadily, illuminating everything around me. The light was warm, not harsh or blinding, and it seemed to pulse gently, as if it were alive. I felt an inexplicable pull toward it, a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in months. It was as though the light was calling me, inviting me to move closer. As I drifted toward it, the sounds of the room below began to fade. The voices of the paramedics, Miriam's sobs, the beeping of their equipment, it all dissolved into a soft hum. The light seemed to envelop me, wrapping me in a warmth that felt both comforting and overwhelming. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of what lay ahead. Was this death? Was this the presence of God I had spoken about so many times? I didn't know, but I couldn't resist the pull. It was as if every part of me was drawn to it, like a moth to a flame. Then, just as I began to surrender to the light, I heard something. Faint at first, but growing clearer. Voices, familiar voices. They were calling my name, softly, lovingly. One was my mother's voice, the same voice that had sung me to sleep as a child. Another was my father's, reciting a prayer I hadn't heard in decades. The sound of their voices stirred something deep within me, a longing, a sense of home. I moved closer to the light, the pull becoming stronger with each passing moment. I didn't know what awaited me, but I felt no fear. Instead, there was a quiet anticipation, a sense that I was on the brink of something profound. As the voices grew louder, the light seemed to expand, enveloping everything in its glow. And just as I felt myself crossing into its embrace, everything around me shifted once again. What lay ahead, I couldn't have imagined in my wildest dreams. As I moved deeper into the light, I felt a warmth that was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't just physical, it touched my soul, wrapping me in a sense of peace and love that words could never capture. The light seemed alive, pulsating gently as if it were breathing. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I was free from pain, from worry, from the weight of the world. It felt as though I was being welcomed home, embraced by something far greater than myself. Then the light began to shift. Images started to appear, not in front of me, but within the light itself, as if it held the story of my life. I saw myself as a young boy running through the fields near my childhood home, carefree and full of wonder. I heard my mother's laughter as she called me inside for dinner, her voice filled with the kind of love that stays with you forever. The image changed, and I saw myself as a teenager, poring over the Torah, my father's proud smile as he watched me. It was as if the light was showing me the moments that had shaped me, the foundations of my faith. The scenes kept coming, faster now. My ordination as a rabbi, the first sermon I delivered to my congregation, the tears of gratitude from a family I had counseled through grief. I saw the faces of people I had helped over the years, their expressions of relief and hope. Each moment felt alive, as though I were reliving it. And with every image, I felt a sense of purpose, a reaffirmation of the life I had dedicated to God. But then, the atmosphere began to change. The warmth of the light started to fade, replaced by a chill that crept into the air. The vibrant glow dimmed, and the comforting hum that had surrounded me was replaced by an eerie silence. I felt a knot form in my stomach, a sense of unease that I couldn't shake. The images in the light shifted too, becoming less vibrant, their colors muted and lifeless. Something was wrong, but I couldn't understand what. As the light dimmed further, the silence was broken by a faint sound. At first a whisper, then a low, anguished moan. It grew louder, filling the space around me, until it became a chorus of cries. I turned, searching for the source, and what I saw shook me to my core. Shapes began to emerge from the dimness, figures writhing in pain, their faces contorted in agony. Men, women, even children, their cries piercing through me like a blade. They reached out, their hands clawing at the air as if begging for help, their voices a symphony of despair. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. I was frozen, rooted to the spot, as the suffering unfolded before me. These were not just images. They felt real, tangible. I could feel their pain, their anguish, as if it were my own. It was overwhelming, suffocating. I had spent my life teaching about God's mercy and justice. But here, in this place, those teachings felt distant and inadequate. How could this suffering exist in the presence of a just and loving God? I tried to pray, to recite the words that had always brought me comfort, but they wouldn't come. My mind was a whirlwind of questions and doubt. Who were these people? Why were they here? Was this some form of judgment? The cries grew louder, their anguish pressing down on me, and I felt an overwhelming sense of helplessness. I had spent my life guiding others, but here, in this place, I had no answers. And then, cutting through the chaos, I heard a voice. It was deep, resonant, and unlike anything I had ever heard before. It wasn't angry, but it carried a weight, a power that silenced everything around it. "David," the voice said, addressing me by name. It was calm yet commanding, and as it spoke, the cries of anguish faded into the background. I turned toward the source of the voice, my heart pounding. The figures in torment seemed to dissolve into the darkness, leaving me alone in the void. The air was heavy, thick with anticipation, as if the entire universe were holding its breath. I didn't know who or what was speaking to me, but I knew deep in my soul that this was a moment that would change everything. Whatever was about to happen, I would never be the same. The voice called my name again, resonating with a power that seemed to penetrate every part of my being. "David," it said, not in anger, but with a weight that demanded my full attention. "Who is God?" The question struck me like a lightning bolt. "Who is God?" I repeated almost instinctively. The answer should have come easily. I had spent my life teaching others about God, studying the Torah, and praying to the Creator. Yet, in that moment, the words felt elusive, hollow. The voice asked again, its tone calm but insistent. "Have you truly known me?" The question echoed in the silence, reverberating through the space around me. My mind raced, grasping for certainty. Of course I knew God. I had prayed to Him every day, studied His Word, and devoted my life to serving Him. But the more I tried to answer, the more I realized how much I had taken for granted. The question wasn't about rituals or teachings, it was about understanding. And in that moment, I wasn't sure if I had truly known Him. As I stood there, the darkness around me began to shift. It was as if the voice had unlocked something, and now the void was filling with visions, scenes that blurred the boundaries of time and belief. I saw Abraham on Mount Moriah, his hand trembling as he prepared to sacrifice Isaac, his faith unwavering. I saw Moses on Sinai, the tablets of the covenant glowing with divine fire. These were stories I had known my entire life, moments I had preached about with conviction. But then, the visions began to change. I saw a man I did not recognize, walking along a dusty road, his face radiant with peace and purpose. He was surrounded by people, fishermen, laborers, women and children, all hanging on his every word. As he spoke, his voice carried a power that stirred something deep within me, even though I couldn't hear the words. Who was this man? He wasn't part of the stories I had told, yet he felt undeniably familiar. The scenes shifted again, this time showing him performing acts that defied logic. I watched as he touched the eyes of a blind man, and the man's face lit up with astonishment as his sight was restored. I saw him kneeling beside a crippled man, lifting him to his feet, and the man walking with a strength that seemed impossible. These were not the miracles of Moses or Elijah. They were something different, something personal. The vision grew brighter, and I saw the man standing before a great crowd, his voice ringing out with authority. "I am the way, the truth, and the life," he said. "No one comes to the Father except through me." The words hit me like a tidal wave, their meaning as clear as it was unsettling. This was Jesus, the man I had known only through distant accounts, through lenses of skepticism and theological boundaries, now stood before me in undeniable clarity. The visions began to intertwine, merging the Torah with the New Testament in a way I couldn't comprehend. I saw the commandments given to Moses, their weighty stone tablets glowing with divine authority, and then I saw Jesus lifting a loaf of bread, breaking it, and offering it to his followers. "This is my body given for you," he said. The connections were dizzying, as if threads from two separate tapestries were being woven together before my eyes. As I struggled to make sense of it all, The voice spoke again, no longer distant, but close, as if it came from within me. David, you have spent your life seeking me, but have you truly found me? Tears streamed down my face. I have tried, I whispered. I thought I understood, but now I don't know. The visions faded, replaced by a blinding light. From within that light, a figure emerged. It was the same man I had seen in the visions, Jesus. His presence was overwhelming, not in power, but in compassion. His eyes met mine, and in them, I saw a depth of love I couldn't fathom. He didn't need to speak for me to feel the weight of his presence, but when he did, his words carried a clarity and authority that left no room for doubt. David, he said, his voice gentle yet firm, you have known the law and the prophets, but the fullness of truth is before you now. I came not to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. You have sought God in the commandments, and they are good. But the path to the Father is through me. I fell to my knees, unable to stand under the weight of his words. They weren't a condemnation, they were an invitation. But why me? I asked, my voice trembling. Why now? Jesus stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. Because you have the courage to ask, to seek beyond what you know. That is the first step toward truth. He paused, his expression softening. David, what you have taught and believed has not been in vain. Your devotion has brought you here, but there is more to know. The question is, will you have the courage to follow where I lead? The light around him seemed to pulse, as if waiting for my response. I was overwhelmed, my heart and mind wrestling with the implications of what I had seen and heard. Before I could answer, he spoke one final time. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be opened. With that, the light intensified, and the vision began to fade. I was left with his words, echoing in my mind, their meaning both clear and yet impossibly vast. Whatever lay ahead, I knew my life would never be the same. The moment I returned to my body was abrupt, almost violent. One instant, I was in the light, surrounded by truth and love, and the next, I was gasping for air, the sterile glare of fluorescent lights flooding my eyes. My chest felt heavy, my limbs weak, and the sharp beeping of monitors filled the room. I could hear voices, urgent, relieved, coming from the doctors and nurses around me. He's back, someone said. Miriam's face appeared above me, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She grabbed my hand, tears of relief streaming down her face. I had survived, but as I lay there, struggling to process what had happened, I realized that survived wasn't the right word. I had been somewhere else, seen something beyond this world, and the weight of it was crushing. The hospital became my home for the next few days, as the medical team monitored my condition. They were baffled by my recovery, given how close I had been to death. But for me, the physical healing was secondary to the storm raging in my soul. The vision I had seen, the voice I had heard, and the encounter with Jesus, they refused to leave my mind. They felt more real than anything I had ever experienced, yet they left me with more questions than answers. At first, I tried to bury it. I returned to my prayers, reciting the words I had known my whole life, but they felt different now, hollow, almost unfamiliar. The teachings I had devoted my life to began to feel incomplete, as though they were missing a vital piece. I wanted to ignore the vision, to dismiss it as the product of a dying mind, but I couldn't. The memory of Jesus' words, "Seek and you will find," kept resurfacing, pulling at the edges of my faith. I confided in no one, not even Miriam. How could I explain what I had seen without shattering the foundation of everything I had built? Instead, I wrestled with it in silence, poring over the Torah, searching for answers. But the more I searched, the more I realized that the questions I was asking could not be answered by the texts I had always relied on. One day, while out on a walk to clear my head, I passed by a small church. Something about it caught my attention. The doors were open and the sound of quiet singing drifted out. I hesitated, feeling out of place, but the pull I had felt in the vision returned, urging me forward. I stepped inside, and an older man in clerical robes greeted me warmly. He introduced himself as Pastor Thomas and invited me to sit. Before I knew it, I was pouring out my story to him, the illness, the vision, the voice, and my encounter with Jesus. He listened without interruption, his expression one of quiet understanding. When I finished, he handed me a Bible. "You've been given a gift," he said gently. "It's not an easy path, but truth rarely is. Perhaps this will help." At first, I was hesitant to open the book. It felt like crossing a line, stepping into unfamiliar territory. But one night, unable to sleep, I picked it up. The words were foreign yet strangely familiar, resonating with the same authority and compassion I had felt in the vision. As I read about Jesus' life and teachings, pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. His words about love, grace, and truth spoke directly to my heart, answering questions I hadn't even realized I was asking. The turning point came when Pastor Thomas invited me to a Bible study group. I was nervous, unsure of how I would be received, but the group welcomed me with open arms. For the first time, I felt free to ask the questions that had been consuming me. Their responses were thoughtful, patient, and filled with a love that mirrored the presence I had felt in the vision. As the weeks passed, my heart began to change. The doubts that had weighed me down started to lift, replaced by a sense of peace I had never known. The teachings of Jesus didn't conflict with my understanding of God. They completed it. The day I decided to follow him was both the hardest and the most liberating day of my life. When I told my family, their reactions were mixed. Miriam was devastated, struggling to understand how I could leave behind the faith we had shared for so long. My children were confused, their questions echoing the ones I had asked myself in the beginning. It was painful, but I knew I couldn't turn back. I prayed for their understanding, trusting that God would work in their hearts as he had in mine. Today, my life looks very different from what it once was. I still carry the lessons of the Torah with me, but they are now illuminated by the light of Jesus' teachings. I share my story not to convince anyone, but to testify to the transformation that is possible when we seek truth with open hearts. If my story has resonated with you, I encourage you to comment your name below so we can pray for you. Each of us is on a journey, and prayer is a powerful way to find guidance and strength. Thank you for watching, If you'd like to hear more incredible stories of near-death experiences, check out the videos on the screen. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to support our channel. May you find peace and truth on your journey.